The night fell upon the world as the first images began to circulate. There, before thousands of attentive eyes, the coffin of a religious leader was guarded by two symbols that would provoke more unease than comfort. Inverted crosses, imposing and silent, watched over the funeral. On social media, in the streets, and in churches, the same whisper echoed. What did these images really mean? The story that would follow would mix tradition, ancient symbolism, old rituals, and theories that few dare to discuss out loud. But would the simple inversion of a sacred symbol be enough to rewrite centuries of faith? Or were there hidden layers that even the keenest eyes failed to see? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I am Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I would like to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just a click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to deliver the videos to more people, and for me to continue bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's dive into the video. When images of Pope Francis' funeral began to spread around the world, one scene in particular captured everyone's attention. 2 inverted crosses prominently placed near the coffin. Were you intrigued too? Because whoever saw it felt that it carried a different weight. It wasn't just a detail, it was a message. The first explanation many people heard was that this cross represented Saint Peter, the one who, according to ancient accounts, asked to be crucified upside down. The story is beautiful, of course. It speaks of humility, of respect. But in that carefully staged setting, was that really all that was being conveyed? Think about it with me. The Vatican is not an institution that leaves details to chance. Every image, every symbol used in public ceremonies is planned months in advance. So why choose precisely a symbol that, outside of internal tradition, is so associated with occultism, inversion of values, and even rituals opposing the Church? When we look closer, we realize that the inverted cross has become, over the centuries, much more than a Christian emblem. In esoteric movements, and even in popular culture, it has become synonymous with rebellion, with defiance. So even if its origin is sacred, the symbolic weight it carries today is different, and that's no small matter. And now comes the key point. During the funeral, these crosses were not hidden nor discreet. They were part of the main setting, practically invited to be noticed. Could anyone have expected them to go unnoticed? Or was the intention precisely that, to make those who saw it question what it really meant? In ancient times, inverted symbols were used to announce profound changes, ruptures that could not be spoken aloud. In rarely disclosed medieval documents, there are records that inverted crosses secretly marked the end of old spiritual alliances. Could we be seeing the Vatican repeating old gestures, this time before the eyes of the world? Of course, officially, the Church preferred not to delve into explanations. The justification was simple, the tradition of Saint Peter. Nothing more. But have you noticed how often what is not said speaks louder than what is? In this case, the Vatican's silence only served to increase suspicions even more. Watching the ceremony, it's hard to ignore the feeling that the inversion was not merely an aesthetic detail. It was as if the scene itself was inviting the most attentive eyes to decipher a riddle. What were they trying to tell us? What cycle was being closed there, before so many mourning faithful? Bolder theorists suggest that the explicit presence of the inverted crosses could be the harbinger of a new era for the Church, an era where old dogmas would be questioned or even abandoned. Is it an exaggeration to think that? Perhaps. But given the symbolic force of that funeral, it's hard to simply dismiss that possibility. The fact is that, even with the flood of speculations, no cross was removed, no symbol was altered. Everything was maintained until the very last moment, as if there were a determination to leave the scene imprinted in the collective memory. As if the message needed to be passed on, even without words, and what remained was doubt. Was it merely a tribute to Saint Peter, as they say, or a silent ritual marking the end of an era that not everyone is ready to see? The answer, perhaps, lies between the lines, or in what was left unsaid. The story of the inverted cross begins long before modern times, and to truly understand it, we must go back to the 1st century in Rome. Saint Peter, one of the most important figures in Christianity, was condemned to death. According to tradition, he asked to be crucified upside down, as he did not consider himself worthy of dying like Christ. A gesture of humility, right? But is this version really that simple? reliable historical accounts of Peter's crucifixion are extremely rare. The main record comes from apocryphal texts, such as the Acts of Peter, written decades after his death. There are no contemporary testimonies confirming the episode. This raises a legitimate doubt. Was this story later constructed to reinforce Peter's image as a martyr and, consequently, consolidate papal power? If we look at the context of the time, the church was in its formative stages and desperately needed strong symbols. A leader who dies in a manner even more humiliating than Christ became the perfect example of absolute faith. But could it be that the spread of this narrative also served a strategic function, creating a lineage of sacrifice and unquestionable authority? Thus, in this scenario, the inverted cross would not be merely an expression of humility, but also an instrument of power. It would separate Peter from the other followers, marking him as the chosen one to found what would become the Church of Rome. The image of a man willing to die in an even more humiliating way reinforced the need for total obedience among the faithful, who would dare to question the leadership of Peter's successor. And it's curious to observe that for centuries, this symbolism remained restricted to the inner circles of the church. The inverted cross was reserved for specific contexts, mainly used in sacred art and papal coats of arms. It was not displayed publicly on a large scale, as we see today. The public inversion of symbols has always been a powerful and dangerous tool. Some scholars claim that, between the lines, the story of the inverted crucifixion could also carry a form of controlled subversion. By inverting the symbol of the cross, the church might have been acknowledging the need to adapt, to reinvent itself to survive in a hostile world. A bold move for a time when the survival of faith depended on the ability to transform. This alternative view, of course, has never been taught from the pulpits. The official tradition always preferred the version of absolute humility, much easier for ordinary believers to accept. But for those who study deeply, it becomes clear that the symbols of the church do not always carry just one meaning. In fact, when they do, the story is almost always more interesting, isn't it? If the inverted cross was born as a symbol of humility, it also became, over time, a mark of power, control, and adaptation. And in this game of interpretations, every time we see the cross turned upside down, we need to ask, who is speaking through this gesture? Is it the voice of simple faith or the voice of political strategy? Interestingly, even among the most learned priests and theologians, there is a visible discomfort when openly discussing the history of the inverted cross. Some prefer to ignore the deeper layers of symbolism. Others, more daring, suggest that there are pieces of knowledge simply not meant to be shared with everyone. Thinking this way might seem extreme, but the very history of the church is filled with secrets, codes, and signs reserved only for the initiated. Would it be so strange to imagine that the inverted cross might also be one of these hidden keys? So when we encounter inverted crosses in papal ceremonies today, perhaps we are witnessing more than a simple act of homage. Perhaps it is the echo of a story carefully crafted to protect truths that remain, even today, beyond the reach of the majority. And faced with this, the question remains, are we really seeing only symbols of faith or silent signs of something that began long ago and is still far from ending? Among the many traditions surrounding the death of a pope, one stands out for its symbolic strength and the mystery it carries: the destruction of the Fisherman's Ring. The ring, worn by the Pope to authenticate documents and official acts, is more than a simple adornment. It is, in practice, the seal of the pontiff's spiritual authority over the Catholic Church. But what few people know is that the ritual of destroying the ring is shrouded in secrets and interpretations that go far beyond the surface. Have you ever wondered why something so precious and full of meaning would be destroyed? Officially, the reason is to prevent forgeries and protect the Vatican's authority. But is that the only reason? Think about it with me. In such an ancient and ritualistic institution as the Church, every gesture carries multiple layers of meaning. In the case of Pope Francis, the ceremony for the destruction of the Fisherman's Ring drew even more attention. Instead of simply destroying the ring completely, as tradition dictated, a deep incision in the shape of a cross was made on it. A detail that went unnoticed by many, but for those observing closely, it raises serious questions. Imagine if that cross engraved on the ring was not just a mark of invalidation, but a ritual symbol, a kind of seal. In ancient traditions, marking a sacred object with a cross was a way of sealing, imprisoning, or even transferring the power contained within it. Could it be that, unknowingly, we witnessed a much deeper closure ritual? Ancient records of religious practices show that rings were seen as receptacles of spiritual authority. Destroying them meant releasing that energy, or, in more specific cases, sealing it to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. Have you ever thought that by marking Francis' ring in that way, the Vatican might have been sealing not just an era, but also protecting something invisible? Another curiosity few people mention. Traditionally, the Camerlengo is responsible for the destruction of the ring. He is the temporary administrator of the church after a pope's death. And if I told you that in many ancient cultures, the figure of the Camerlengo was associated with the keeper of the keys, the one who oversees transitions of power, nothing in ancient rituals was done without a profound knowledge of symbolism. The act of marking the ring instead of destroying it can be interpreted as a subtle but powerful change, a sign that the church recognizes the need to preserve certain legacies, even if it officially declares otherwise. Do you also notice how small details can carry enormous messages? When we analyze the symbolism of the ring, it's impossible not to think about the church's very role as a mediator between the divine and the earthly. How many times have you seen seemingly simple symbols hiding complex stories behind them? Perhaps the Fisherman's Ring, engraved with a deep cross, is one more of those silent stories. There are even theorists who suggest that this act could represent a ritualistic protection against possible spiritual or political threats. It may sound crazy, but what if the ring had to be sealed to prevent unknown forces from taking advantage of the Pope's death to open breaches within the Church's spiritual structure? And for those who think this is just theory, it's worth remembering. Throughout the centuries, the Vatican has faced countless crises involving forged documents, usurpation of authority, and even secret practices to protect its secrets. Have you noticed how these traditions persist, even in modern times? In the end, what seemed to be merely a formal tradition reveals itself as an act filled with mystery and meaning. Could the simple act of destroying or marking a ring still today have the power to keep an entire legacy sealed? Or are we witnessing a new phase where even the Vatican can no longer hide its oldest rituals? Of all the mysteries surrounding the history of the Church, few are as frightening as the prophecies about the end times. And one of the most famous is the so-called prophecy of Saint Malachi. Have you heard of it? According to this ancient list, there would only be a few more popes before the final collapse of the Church. And what if I told you that, for many, Pope Francis was the last true pontiff of this prophetic line? The prophecy, attributed to Saint Malachi, a 12th century Irish archbishop, describes a series of 112 Latin mottos, each representing a pope. According to the most accepted interpretation, the last on the list would be Peter the Roman, during whose reign Rome would be destroyed and the final judgment would come. Interestingly, Francis did not adopt the name Peter when he assumed the papacy, but his trajectory presents signs that many find disturbing. Have you ever thought about what it would be like if a prophecy written almost 1,000 years ago were being fulfilled before our eyes? For many scholars and curious observers, Francis's election marked a drastic change within the Church, a more open, more political leadership, and for some, more distant from the rigid traditions that defined Catholic faith for centuries. During his pontificate, Francis faced unprecedented internal crises, financial scandals, abuse allegations, and deep doctrinal divisions. Do you also feel that sometimes it seemed like the very foundation of the Church was slowly crumbling? For some theorists, these cracks are no coincidence. They are clear signs of the fulfillment of the ancient prediction. Moreover, there is an interesting detail. Francis's papal coat of arms features symbols that many associate with themes of transformation and passage. Imagine if every choice he made, from his vestments to his refusal to live in the apostolic palace, was silently fulfilling a narrative written long before he was born. In 2020, a specific event further fueled this theory. During the pandemic, Francis walked alone across St. Peter's Square, deserted under a storm, in one of the most symbolic images in the modern history of the Vatican. Have you ever thought that that scene could be interpreted as the portrait of a collapsing era? But hold on, it's important to remember. The Church has never officially recognized the prophecy of Saint Malachi as valid. Officially, it is treated as apocryphal. Still, that hasn't stopped entire generations of researchers and believers from analyzing each new pope in light of this ancient prediction. How many times have you seen officially dismissed stories end up having a grain of truth? There is also a line of thought that believes that, even if the prophecy did not have divine origin, It could have been used as a form of programming to shape the behavior of subsequent popes. It might sound crazy, but what if, upon knowing about the prophecy, leaders throughout history unconsciously molded themselves to fulfill it? And now, with Francis out of the scene, the inevitable question remains: will his successor be the prophesied Peter the Roman? Are we entering a new era, marked by even greater challenges and possible revelations that will shake the very foundations of the Vatican? One thing is undeniable. Since the first inverted cross appeared at Francis's funeral, the feeling that a definitive page has been turned lingers in the air. And whether out of faith, fear, or simple curiosity, more and more eyes are turning toward what will come next. Right after Pope Francis's funeral, the internet became a fertile ground for mysteries and interpretations. Images of the ceremony spread with astonishing speed, every detail analyzed by thousands of attentive eyes. And as expected, the presence of inverted crosses beside the coffin ignited theories of all kinds. Have you noticed how certain symbols seem to have the power to awaken ancient fears that never really disappeared? Think about it with me. In a time when any image can be zoomed in, cropped, and reinterpreted, the Pope's funeral turned into a massive collective puzzle. Some saw the inverted crosses as a sign that ancient prophecies were being fulfilled. Others associated the symbols with secret transitional rituals as old as the Church itself. Have you ever stopped to think that what is shown publicly can sometimes carry messages that not everyone is able to grasp? Amid so many circulating versions, there were also rumors about supposed secret ceremonies held away from the cameras, reinforcing the idea that what the public saw was only the surface. Videos and photos shared rapidly brought different interpretations. Some claimed to have captured strange movements, tense glances between members of the clergy, small gestures that, for those who believe in hidden signs, could not be mere coincidences. Is all of this just the result of collective imagination, or are there details that escape the untrained eye? Imagine if, in the middle of such an important ceremony, ancient codes were being repeated without most people realizing it. How many times have you seen seemingly innocent gestures carry deep meanings for those who know what to look for? One of the most discussed theories involved the very positioning of the crosses in relation to the coffin. According to some independent investigators, the arrangement of the symbols followed geometric patterns used in rites of passage of authority, a practice common in ancient traditions across various cultures. Do you also feel that sometimes certain details are arranged too precisely to be mere coincidence? Among so many comments, there were also suppositions that the inversion of the crosses symbolized not just St. Peter's humility, but a kind of forced renunciation of certain church dogmas. Something that, if stated openly, would cause a profound impact. It may sound like too much theory, but what if there is at least a grain of truth hidden amidst so much silence? It is interesting to observe that in no official statement did Vatican representatives rush to refute or clarify these interpretations. Have you ever thought about how silence can be just as powerful as a confirmation? Amid all this, the doubt grows. Are these theories just exaggerated interpretations from a modern internet hungry for mysteries? Or are we witnessing fragments of a much larger story, one that only a few are trained to recognize? Have you ever had the feeling that there are hidden messages in major public events, ready to be perceived only by those who know what to look for? If that's the case, perhaps Pope Francis's funeral was much more than a simple farewell. Among frozen images, ancient symbols, and hidden interpretations, what remained was an almost palpable feeling that not everything was explained. And when so many questions remain unanswered, it's impossible not to wonder, how many secrets are still kept behind the walls of the Vatican? Long before the cross became the ultimate symbol of Christianity, ancient civilizations were already using similar representations. And among these cultures, the idea of an inverted cross carried a completely different meaning from what we know today. Have you ever thought that sometimes what is seen as sinister today was once a sign of spiritual power? In Celtic rituals, for example, inverted cross symbols were used in ceremonies marking seasonal changes and the celebration of natural cycles. The inversion of the cross signaled the passage from one era to another, the symbolic death of old structures and the birth of new realities. Have you ever considered how such ancient gestures might still echo in current events? Beyond the Celts, ancient Mediterranean cultures also associated the inverted cross with gateways to the unknown. In mystical traditions, Inverting a symbol was an invitation to break natural rules, an opening for invisible forces to cross the barrier between worlds. Imagine if this practice had survived discreetly through the centuries. During the Middle Ages, alchemists and occultists reinterpreted these symbols in their secret studies. The inverted cross, for them, was not a sign of desecration, but of profound transformation. You know that moment when everything needs to be undone for something new to be born? The inverted cross represented exactly that, the necessary deconstruction for true renewal. Interestingly, internal church documents from earlier eras show that certain rites of passage used inverted crosses in their restricted liturgies. Not for the common public, but among internal orders, where symbolic knowledge was preserved with extreme care. Have you noticed how the most powerful messages are almost never delivered openly? Have you ever wondered why such ancient symbols always seem to return during times of crisis or transition? Perhaps because they carry archetypes so deep that, even unconsciously, they continue to resonate within us. The rebirth of the inverted cross as a symbol of defiance, so popularized in modern times, can be seen as a distortion of its ancient meanings. But what if, deep down, there are still those who know the true power contained within this image? During certain Hermetic initiation rites, inverting symbols was a mandatory step. It was a gesture meant to confront the aspirant with the unknown, forcing them to abandon certainties and face the void. Have you ever felt that true transformation first demands the destruction of old structures? Today, in the context of Pope Francis's funeral, the inverted cross reappears before the world. Is it merely a symbol of humility, as the tradition of St. Peter suggests? Or perhaps, echoing ancient practices, it is also a silent marker indicating the end of a cycle and the preparation for something we do not yet fully understand? How often has official history forgotten to tell what was really hidden behind rituals? It might seem crazy, but what if, in this case, the Vatican itself, consciously or not, is reviving practices that date back to a time when symbols had literal power over reality? In the end, the inverted cross remains there, defiant, enigmatic, carrying centuries of forgotten meanings and mysteries that may never be fully unraveled. And for those who dare to look deeper, the question remains, what silent forces still shape the rituals of the modern world? Among inverted crosses, silent rituals, and ancient prophecies, one certainty stands out. What we see is not always all that exists. Every gesture, every symbol, and every silence carries centuries of history and secrets that may never be completely revealed. Have you ever thought about how many events passed before our eyes while hidden messages unfolded, invisible to the majority? This story is just one piece, and one day, perhaps you'll see the whole puzzle. If this also made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.